Now we're going to look at proper drawing positions and the reason for good drawing positions. That is, the measuring of angles and proportions. If you take one thing away from this class, I hope it is how to measure angles and proportions, because once you have integrated this skill into your drawing practice, you should never ever screw up the perspective or proportions of your subject in an observational drawing again, provided you take the time to measure angles and proportions. Here is the ideal drawing position: standing at an easel, not slouched in a chair with your paper flat on a table. In this position, you should find yourself alert, because standing is an active and engaged position. This artist's arm is one length from her drawing board, and she has her arm straight out and on an imaginary surface beside her easel, upon which she can imagine her subject projected so that she can measure angles and proportions. As well, she can step back from the easel to easily compare her drawing to the subject. A lot of drawing classrooms use drawing horses, benches at which you can sit with your board propped up. This board should perhaps be a bit more vertical, but you can see how two chairs put together create an arrangement similar to a drawing horse. Instead of seeing your subject and drawing more or less side by side, you see your subject over your drawing, so the imaginary surface upon which the subject is projected is above the board, either right or left or in the middle. This is the second best drawing position. If you really must sit, do not plunk your board flat on the table and create extreme foreshortening on your drawing. Prop your board on your knees and lean it on the table, something like this. This allows you to see your subject and measure angles and proportions similarly to sitting on a horse. But this is not the best position. I usually find sitting, particularly in a chair, does not extract the level of concentration that your drawing should deserve. If you do in fact sit at a table with your board laying flat on it, you create a foreshortened view of your drawing surface, which forces the perspective, and you'll tend to make the head, which is further away, larger. When you tilt your drawing up to view it straight on, you will almost always discover a cephalopodic head with withered nether regions on your subject or your figure. It is almost impossible to measure angles and proportions in the abominable sitting at a desk position with the board flat on the table. Here, that upright board is better, much better, at an easel, preferably, or secondarily on a horse. Here is the view on that imaginary sheet of glass at arm's length beside your board, and here is your stylus held at arm's length, featuring measuring angles and proportions. The two right hands show how you can measure the width of the head to the height of the head. All the hands on the left are measuring angles, which, when you swing your straight arm over to your drawing at the easel, can be easily transferred. Here is a drawing unfolding against the view of the subject. Here is an artist sitting on a horse. Their point of view might be something like this. How easy it is to compare the drawing to the subject if you step back. Can you see how easy it might be to measure angles and proportions from this position when you know how? For measuring angles, here's how you can put your pencil or stylus against your subject to measure the angles of the surprising number of straight lines you find even on the human form. Again, like so. You will also be able to clearly see positive and negative spaces. Notice how windows, door jambs, etc. behind your subject are plumb, straight up and straight down as you look at them and measure them. You can create shapes in the negative spaces with these plumb lines, or simply imagine them yourself. You can then check those shapes against the developing shapes in your drawing for accuracy. When you measure angles, you can project unlimited numbers of lines off into surrounding space to make comparisons with your drawing. These lines create new and potentially useful shapes for those comparisons. Never again should you fail to draw something in perspective. You can see the construction lines in these drawings as they unfold. Imagine yourself standing at the easel. In this case, the subject is what is known as a planes of the head. There is also a sheet of plexiglass on the easel and out to the side, to the right. As you look through the plexiglass, what is essentially happening is that the subject is being projected upon the surface of the plexiglass. You could actually trace the projection with considerable accuracy onto the plexiglass, as I've done here. This illustrates what you are seeing from a higher point of view. What we need to be able to do, essentially, is transfer what we see from the transparent surface as a projection onto the opaque surface of our drawing paper beside it. By holding out my pencil at arm's length, see how I can measure an angle vertically through the center of the head, or measure the angles of the eyes. I've slid the plexiglass over to the left to essentially transfer my traced drawing onto the surface of the paper. This is a sight-size drawing. It appears in exactly the same size as how I saw it projected on the plexiglass surface. In a sense, our task in observational drawing at the easel is to do just this, transfer information from the projection to the drawing paper. And here you can see how the angle can be measured from the subject, or the projection of the subject onto the drawing. See how here, keeping your arm dead straight, you can place the tip of your pencil at the top of the head and slide your thumb down the pencil to the chin, thereby sizing the head. If you were to draw a whole figure, a whole person, you could use the head top to bottom as your basic unit against which to measure the height of the whole figure top to bottom, or various parts, providing you take your measurements with your arm fully stretched out and from the same station point. That is to say, you cannot move back and forth from the projection an arm's length, more than an arm's length away, or you will adjust the scale. This is similar to how, if you have a projector and an image, and project an image, if you project it on a surface nearby, it is smaller, but if you project it on a wall far away, it's larger. The image scales up or scales down, but the proportions in the image, as measured against each other, remain the same. If I'm just drawing the head, I can measure the width of the head like so, tip of the crayon to thumb. And keeping my arm straight and my thumb in the same position, I can turn it around and compare the width of the face to the height of the face. The width seems to be the same as the height to the middle of the forehead. Here we are measuring from the chin to the eyes. Notice again how I've moved my thumb down from the tip of the pencil to indicate the distance, and then comparing that measurement from the eyes to the top of the head. The distances are the same. This reveals that the eyes are in fact right in the middle of the head, as we are not looking up or down at the face dramatically, but rather close to straight on. You would not necessarily think that the eyes are right in the middle, between the top of the head and chin, because the brain fixates on the eyes and mouth, giving short thrift, quite literally, to the chin and forehead. When drawing without observing carefully, this fixation will tend to make us push the eyes unnaturally to the top of the head and the mouth unnaturally to the bottom of the chin. So here we go, observing the subject located in the place where we previously imagined it as a projection onto glass, and then transferring information from what we see there to our drawing surface. But this time I don't want to make my drawing exactly the same size as it appears projected on the imaginary glass beside the easel. I want to fill the page more, that is, I want to scale the drawing up and not simply size it. To do this, I simply indicate the dorsal line of the face, approximately the size I would like it, by placing it a little further left or right if I perceive more of either side shows. That is, taking note of the slight 3/4 view. You can see the vertical line drawn to indicate the center of the face, which is an extension of the linea alba, a ventral line with apparent symmetry on either side of the body. I've also indicated a slightly tilted horizontal line through the center of the eyes and also where the chin will be. I measured the angle of this line to ascertain it had a slight tilt because of the 3/4 view. I've tried to estimate how the whole head will fill the page while doing this, allowing for the fact that, from this point of view, looking somewhat down on the subject, the distance from the chin to the eyes will be just a little bit less from the eyes to the top of the head. I need to allow for this slightly larger volume above the eyes when I place the lines for the eyes and the chin. It is very difficult to deconstruct a complex process of decision-making while drawing into a multitude of little parcels documenting the many measurements, estimates, and decisions made over the time of its making. Many of the estimates and measurements are not quite correct, and the errors are quickly erased or drawn over. This is why a constructed observational drawing can look so messy or interesting according to your point of view. I like this activity, this push and pull, this sense of struggle, the palimpsest and piantamento that hard-won, accurate, and solid drawing exudes. I love looking at student drawings, particularly when they result from being utterly engaged in this observational process. There is no time or mental space to try and look slick and clever. The process is authentic, and to my eye, the resulting student drawings have an air of authenticity about them. Even those highly skilled and practiced at drawing, and therefore at great risk of becoming inauthentic when confronted by the observational drawing process, are humbled into a beginner's mind that is fresh and new. It is like looking at the world for the first time again. This is why I love to go to life drawing sessions where you are further forced to concentrate the mind as a result of the limited duration of each pose. So rather than document every one of the multitude of decisions and measurements made during the drawing, here are some glimpses of just several of the many fractions of the drawing process. See here how I can directly measure the angle of the side of the face on the projection to the angle of the side of the face on the drawing. I keep my arms straight and swing the arm from the subject or the projection to the drawing to transfer the angle, whilst pushing and pulling, adjusting, scratching my head, picking my nose, pinching and slapping myself repeatedly. I'm looking at the inner component shapes of the planes of the head and confirming that my drawing matches them. Notice the shape between the eyebrows on the subject with the X on it. Notice how I can match the two shapes easily by direct comparison. See the many shapes on the planes of the head I could do this with. Imagine the negative shapes outside of the body of the head, where I could do the same thing. With a standing figure, a model in life drawing, there would be numerous negative spaces between arms and legs to consider and make comparisons with. I struggled to place the eye on my left. Once I had ascertained the size and proportions of the mouth, I could hang a line, so to speak, parallel to the left side of the head, from the edge of the mouth to the center of the eye, to confirm I had the eye and mouth in the right place. This is not lyrical drawing by any means. This is not how I personally like or would want to draw. I want my drawing to be far more intuitive and flowy than when I'm working like this. But when you need to take the time to create an extremely proportionally accurate observational drawing, this procedure is of great value. It is a fundamental of knowing how to draw, and I am constantly astonished at how few people and how few artists know how to do it, despite vaguely knowing about it. If you ever see a cartoon of an artist drawing a model, you could be sure the artist has his arm outstretched and perhaps thumb sticking up and his tongue sticking out. We know about this method, but only as an affectation in a parody of the artist. So many people who should know better do not know how to easily draw a building in perspective by this observational method. There is no excuse for shoddy perspective if you take the time to look at what you have drawn, measure angles and proportions, and adjust your drawing accordingly. I personally think that the best use of this method is to draw fluidly, and as best as you can, regularly stepping back and trying to spot the difference between your subject in the projection and your drawing, and if an error leaps out, then measure angles and proportions and make the appropriate adjustments. I make lots of errors. I like their recording in a drawing. I like to see the struggle of an artist, of piantamento, a Renaissance Italian term that describes multiple searching lines that an artist makes to find the right one that looks correct to the eye and is then emboldened. Spot the difference again. Spot the difference between the many wrong lines and the right one. One last observation about this method of constructed drawing which charms me. If you look at this constructed drawing, with construction and measuring lines vectoring off into surrounding space, there is the hint of the cubistic about it. Cubism was actually called an analytical cubism. It was not a stylistic affectation as so many people might think. The original cubists would have been, for the most part, highly trained observational drawers, and cubism itself was highly observational, and as the name suggests, analytical of what is observed. In a sense, cubism might have evolved from this very process of creating a constructed drawing by measuring angles and proportions, fertilized and stimulated by a time in history when new discoveries, both theoretical and practical, were stirring up the world. Multiple exposure photography and moving pictures were able to envision forms, including the human form, in more than one place at various instances of time, suggesting the positive space of form invading the negative space of the vacuum, and vice versa. If there are hints of vectors and planes expanding into space on the demonstration drawing, see how much more so cubists expanded the process, developing many nuanced and imagined surfaces toppling into space, putting form, matter, point of view, and perhaps even consciousness itself into a questionable metastable state. After the initial analytical phase, cubism often tended to flatten out, to become more graphic, to further test the bounds of the domains of the three-dimensional with the two-dimensional, establishing ways of seeing in the visual arts that would exist for decades, if not in perpetuity. Here's one last note on the relationship between art and science during the Cubist era. In physics, perplexing notions of time and space and matter and perspective were afoot that heavily influenced art, as much as art is alleged to have influenced physics. Take a look at Jean Metzinger's Woman with a Horse, showing a subject from various aspects, from various points of view at once, with boundaries of form between space, confounded as though the subject is invading space and space is invading the subject. It's as if the form is perhaps tunneling through time and space. As metaphor, the painting is known to have influenced the understanding of early quantum physics. Not uncoincidentally, this painting actually came into the collection of the Danish theoretical physicist Niels Bohr.